Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. And as the Bible says, pray for peace in Jerusalem. The Lord bless us and keep us. The Lord make his face shine upon us and be gracious unto us. The Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon us and give us peace now and always. Amen.
Please be seated.
Administration of oaths and affirmations.
There are no affirmations for this morning.
Reading by the Honourable Speaker, messages and announcements.
No messages. We've received apologies for the Honourable Minister responsible for financial services and for the late arrival of the Honourable Premier.
Presentation of petitions.
There are no petitions.
Presentation of papers and of reports. Cayman Islands Early Year Curricular Framework to be laid on the table by the Honourable Minister of Education, Employment and Gender Affairs.
I recognise the Honourable Minister responsible for education.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the Cayman Islands Early Years Curriculum Framework.
So order. Sarge.
Madam Chair, may I speak briefly to...
Please proceed, Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I would just like to read into the record of these proceedings the fact that the Cayman Islands Early Years Curriculum Framework was developed by the Ministry of Education's Early Childhood Care and Education Unit in response to the need within our community for guiding document that would ensure consistent provision within the early years. Madam Chair, it gives me great pleasure to say that this framework embraces best practice inclusive of the Caribbean community, CARICOM, and in accordance with the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, 1995. It also honors our culture, Madam Speaker, and supports our youngest citizens as they grow and develop to become responsible members of the Cayman Islands community. Madam Speaker, the culture and needs of our community as a whole took to the forefront when developing this document, as it has to fit our society as a whole. And as you will see in the very first pages of this curriculum, Madam Speaker, the lyrics and melody of our national song is enshrined. The Early Years Curriculum Framework provides support and guidance for professionals as they plan and facilitate developmentally appropriate learning experiences that will cultivate key dispositions for lifelong learning. Effective implementation of this framework will foster collaborative relationships among all stakeholders, including early childhood care and education centres and the families they serve. Madam Speaker, research shows that the early years is the most significant period in the growth and development of young children. In order for our children to develop into well-rounded, confident adults who are assets to our community, we must begin by supporting them in their early years. As we empower our young children to communicate effectively while exploring their world through play and social interactions, we are guiding them on a positive learning pathway. All children are unique individuals, Madam Speaker, and as such, they develop at different paces and have diverse needs and learning styles. Therefore, Madam Speaker, they need early childhood care and education practitioners who are equipped for the task. Madam Speaker, the Cayman Islands Early Years Curriculum Framework is a tool for practitioners to use to develop programs that meet the needs of infants, toddlers, and young children in their care. The framework provides learning outcomes for children that are based on international best practice and activities that are specifically designed to meet the needs of children in the early stages of their development. Madam Speaker, the curriculum framework, again, is designed to ensure that practitioners and caregivers identify the appropriate practices and activities that should be used to assist the infant, the toddler, and the young child during each stage of their development. And there are 4 key focus areas divided into the strands, which are well supported by the learning outcomes enshrined in this curriculum framework. They are exploration, respect, communication, and well-being. And within these 4 strands, Madam Speaker, it deals with issues such as movement, sensory, scientific, mathematical, technological, environment, culture, self, others, verbal and symbolic, listening, creative expression, literacy, health, emotional, and social reflection. Madam Speaker, the aspiration statement enshrined in the curriculum framework is that for all children to be self-confident, resilient, critical thinkers who are intrinsically motivated to explore their world through play and active learning, and are able to clearly and creatively communicate their thoughts and ideas with respect to the people and the world around them. Madam Speaker, the Ministry responsible for education through the Early Childhood Care and Education Unit will continue to offer support as the Cayman Islands Early Years Curriculum Framework is implemented in early childhood care and education centers across our islands. As a matter of fact, each early childhood care and education center received a free printed copies of the curriculum in June of this year. And just last month, some 250 early years practitioners attended training sessions facilitated by the ECCE unit. Madam Speaker, parent meetings at the early childhood centers have also been facilitated and will continue to be facilitated by the Ministry of Education's Early Childhood Care Unit. And all parents and interested parties can access the e-book version of this curriculum framework free on the Ministry of Education's website. Madam Speaker, we are keenly anticipate witnessing the positive effects that experiences generated from the use of this framework will have on the lives of our children and the wider community in the ensuing years. And we are very grateful for the contributions of the wider public that we received during the consultation meetings and the development of the framework, and we would like to acknowledge those accordingly. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Question, Honourable Ministers and Members of the Cabinet. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition, the First Elected Member for West Bay, to ask the Honourable Deputy Governor, ex officio member responsible for the portfolio of civil service. Question number 17.
Recognize the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Honourable Leader of the Opposition. I recognize the member from East End.
Madam Speaker, this is something I didn't necessarily want to do, but there is a certain decorum that must be maintained by members of this honorable House, and also by the public and the press. And I'm a little bit concerned that one of the press members has their foot up as if they're watching TVs in their lounge. And I would appreciate if that is corrected as soon as possible, because I am a little bit concerned about it.
That's okay too, Madam
Member
Speaker.
from Easton, I think has been duly noted by the response of the press member. And member from Northside?
Madam Speaker, my only thing is just leave the beautiful girl alone up there, whatever she wants to do.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition, I'm sure that the Minister responsible for gender affairs might prolong her comments if you continue in that vein. Okay. Honourable Leader of the Opposition, please continue with the ask of your question.
Speaker, at least there's some levity in this place at times. Madam Speaker, I thought this question was sent to the person responsible, the Premier who is responsible for Home Affairs, but I understand that he is not responsible for operations, which was my mistake, and I want to say that publicly. I thought he was responsible for that aspect of it. Anyway, the question is asked of the Honourable Deputy Governor, ex-officio member responsible for the portfolio of the Civil Service. Can the Honourable Member say, A, what are the amount of items stolen from the container recently broken into at the Georgetown Police Station, and B, if drugs were part of the inventory, what is the quantity missing?
Recognized Honourable Deputy Governor.
Good morning, Madam Speaker.
Morning.
Madam Speaker, the answer, drugs were stolen. The quantities taken were 24 kilos of cocaine and 23 kilos of ganja.
If the recognized Honourable Leader of the Opposition, then the third elected member from the district of West Bay to follow.
Madam Speaker, I'm much afraid that the Honourable Deputy Governor has not answered my question in full. He answers question B, but question A, what are the amounts of items stolen from the container recently broken into?
Honourable Deputy.
Meaning, Madam, if I should say clearly, that drugs were only one part of it, or one aspect, or one item that was stolen.
Honourable Deputy Governor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the information that I have was that drugs were the only thing stolen, and I have given the quantities.
Madam Speaker.
1 minute, Leader of Opposition. He's still on his feet, so I'm not
Oh,
sure.
sorry, I thought he had finished.
I had finished.
Oh,
Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I am not going to anyway belittle the answer that I have, because this is a serious, or the attempt to answer this is a serious matter. Because, Madam Speaker, the machinery of the police organization seems to have taken this matter quite lightly, rather than that, Madam Speaker, to explain myself, when this matter came to fore, they said it wasn't true. And then, lo and behold, it was exposed by the media that it had happened, and then there was an announcement by the leadership in the force that nothing was stolen. Anyway, all that hiding, because I think that's what it was, has come to fore. There's an acceptance that it happened. There's an acceptance that these matters, these quantity of drugs were stolen. This is a tremendous amount of drugs that we know are consumed in our country, or believe, let's say we believe it is consumed in our country. But, Madam Speaker, what is the government doing about it? What has been done as far as any kind of reprimand? Because if this had been a local person, you can believe there would have been a lot of noise and some reprimanding going on. Remember, Madam Speaker, that's a given a historical thing. In the prison, we had an outbreak one time. All 2 local people were fired. All 2. And here we are, sitting, taking this quite lightly, to the extent that not even the truth were told, Now, I'm not going to get up and say that that was done deliberate. I don't know how it was done, but it was said publicly, and then the media exposed it. I wouldn't have known, because I was asked about it as the leader of the opposition. I said, me? How do you even get invitations to go anywhere, much less know what's going on up there? So, Madam Speaker, I would like some answer to those points I just raised from the Deputy Governor.
Honourable Deputy Governor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this matter is being taken very seriously. A full investigation of the circumstances of the offences has been underway since the matter was first discovered, and to date has resulted in a number of warrants and arrests, together with seized exhibits, which is currently being forensically examined. Further arrests are expected in the near future. I don't want to go into further details because this is an ongoing investigation, but I've been assured by the top command in the police, in particular the Commissioner of Police, up until Wednesday, that this matter has been given their top priority.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm glad to
Honourable
hear.
Leader of the Opposition.
I'm glad to hear that some number of arrests has been made. Don't know what's going to happen after that, but that has been done. Now, can the member explain how this happened? Here, Madam Speaker, let's picture this. We have a container in a secured area of the police compound, as I understand it, and someone just jumps over and goes into that place and take out 24 kilos of cocaine and 33 kilos of ganja. Can the minister or the official member, explain to the House what he knows in regards to this? He might know everything, Madam Speaker, but...
Honourable Deputy Governor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to be certainly restrained in all the things that I'm saying because the matter is ongoing. I don't want to jeopardize the investigation. But it's quite clear that a lot of the safeguards that were put in place to prevent this from happening didn't work. So, for example, there are alarm systems. There is a strict procedure that says any drugs found has to be destroyed immediately. Obviously, that didn't happen. And all of that, in terms of why the security systems, why all the measures that we have put in place to avoid this happening didn't happen and didn't work, is being looked at, and that's all part of the investigation. This is a very serious incident. It's an attack on the police, an attack on our security services, and the governor, myself, the Commissioner of Police have all been doing everything we can to ensure that the persons who have been involved in this are brought to justice.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Madam Speaker, can the member say what kind of alarm system exists or existed? Who were responsible for them? Who put them in? Who were responsible? And can he say how long were the drugs in that compound?
Honourable Deputy Governor, you can exercise your discretion to the first part and continue to answer whatever other part that may not be in breach of national security.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I don't have information in terms of who installed a security system. I just know that there was a security system in place. Obviously, things didn't work as well as they should. I can assure the members and the public that the drugs that was there was not part of an investigation or that was before the court. It was drugs that had been washed up on shore. They were not there for a long period of time. They were scheduled to be disposed of very shortly, and for some reason it was not. And that's the reason why they were, why it was present when the theft took place.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, can the member say how long were the drugs there?
Honourable Deputy Governor.
Madam Speaker, I don't have that information. I'm quite happy to get it.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for offering that. And I would certainly like a rundown. I am a member of the Security Council, Madam Speaker, but that is neither here nor there. because I don't know if they ever met recently. But can he give us any kind of rundown on what the alarm system consisted of? What kind of security measures exist? And I know that they can say that this is operations, but we do vote money down here. And while it might be operation, I think that they owe us some explanation as to what kind of security exists and who provides it. Cameras. I mean, and I don't expect for the, and I should say clearly, Madam Speaker, I don't expect for the member to come and address this House because, yes, it's on investigation, but there is an ongoing concern, and we must be satisfied as to what is happening. Does they have proper security now? Who provides it? What existed then? Because I don't know, and I don't know if the member himself knows. He might not know, but he could come well in camera and discuss it with us.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition, are you endeavoring to solicit an answer now, or was that an invitation for him to go in camera?
Madam Speaker, I said when he can inform us as to what safeguards existed and who were responsible for the alarm systems, what kind they were, etc. Something that we would have an issue with because we spend the money. And he could do that. I don't expect him to do that now, Madam Speaker, because I suspect he would not know offhand, or he seems to not know offhand. And yes, we could go in camera to discuss it since it's under investigation, and we have done that sort of thing before.
Recognize the first elected member from Bordentown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you to the Honorable Deputy Governor. My recollection that sometime in the past, not of this magnitude, but something happened. Am I right in remembering that situation?
Honorable Deputy Governor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I recall many years ago, maybe as long as 10 years ago, that there was a theft of drugs from the police station.
I recognize the third elected member from Bordentown. I apologize for not calling you before the first elected member because you did catch my eye. Please proceed.
That's okay, Madam Speaker. That's the elder of the House. Madam Speaker, to the Deputy Governor. What has the Governor and yourself decided to do, or what are you discussing before I call it the catalog of errors by this police commissioner and his deputy who seems to make all these policies? We heard the leader of the opposition talk about what happened at the prison before, and we know what's also happened in the police force before when people have not carried out their duties. Did you hear how much kilos the country just finally heard the amount of kilos? This man stood there and lied to us all and said that there was nothing stolen. The next morning, I knew what was stolen. What is being done about this commissioner and his deputy with these catalogs of errors and mistakes concerning their policies? The governor claims that he's doing a good job. Is this another part of doing a good job?
Honorable Deputy Governor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the case is not finished. The matter is ongoing. We need everything to be, the facts to come out to find out exactly where the blame lies before we are able to for the governor, myself, anyone to take action. Madam Speaker, I don't want I think it's unfair for us to say that the commissioner lied about the drugs not being stolen. That's an operational decision. When he gives out information to the public, it's a matter for him. If he thought that giving that information out was going to jeopardize the investigation, sometimes you can't tell the public everything when they want to know. So I think it's unfair to say that it was a deliberate attempt to mislead the public. That was an operational decision, and we have to trust the commissioner to make those calls when he sees fit.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Madam Speaker, can the member say since the arrest, has any of the drugs been recovered?
Honorable Deputy Governor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I know that some drugs were recovered. It was not entirely clear from my understanding that it was related to this. I mean, ganja is ganja, cocaine is cocaine, but some amounts were recovered as a part of the searches that were made, but it was, in my understanding, unsure whether it was linked to the drugs and cocaine that was stolen.
If there are no further supplementaries, we'll move on to the next item of business.
Statements by the honourable members and ministers of the Cabinet.
There are no statements for this morning.
Personal explanations.
No explanations.
Obituaries and other ceremonial speeches.
None.
Raising on the matter of privileges.
There are no matters of privileges for today's order paper. I recognize the Honorable Deputy Premier.
Madam Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Order 14.3 to allow the government business to take precedent over private members' motion.
The question is that Standing Order 14.3 be suspended to allow government business to take precedence over private members' business and motions. All those, I recognize the Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Madam Speaker, I am not going to tender an objection, but I certainly want to put on record that Thursdays are reserved in the standing orders for private members' business, and we do come prepared, and we were notified yesterday that this would be the process. But Thursdays are, in our standing orders, stipulated as private members' day. And what I'm hearing is that government has, in fact, more business, and that will take precedence over the entire, or that's what I understood. I don't know if that's what it was meant to say, but that will take precedence. Government business will take precedence over all the private members' motion. The Premier haven't given an undertaking that he will deal in the meeting, or in this meeting, with private members' business. But just don't, I hope it's just not too long a delay.
Recognize the Honorable Minister for Planning.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just for clarification, what the Premier said what the Honourable Premier said yesterday was that we did not want to lose the momentum of the government business to get it out of the way. But what he did say, which this is just for clarity, that whenever that business is finished, the Honourable Minister for Financial Services will be back on Monday. So I think there are 3 government bills which he has to bring. So the private members' motions will also resume during that interim rather than wait until after the minister comes back on Monday. So if there's time between today and tomorrow for the private members' motions, they can begin to be heard then. Just want to make sure that that's clear.
The question is the Stand Order 14.3 be suspended. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, no. I believe the ayes have it. Standing Order 14.3 is hereby suspended.
Government business bills. First reading, the Dangerous Substance Handling and Storage Amendment Bill 2015.
The bill has been read the first time and is set down for its second reading.
Second reading, the Dangerous Substance Handling and Storage Amendment Bill 2015.
I recognize the Honourable Minister responsible for planning.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm not so sure whether I should say that I am pleased to bring what may well be termed as this milestone legislation this morning, but perhaps more appropriately I should say that I am happy for the opportunity to bring the legislation, because certainly I believe that not only the elected government but the entire country feels the need for this legislation to be brought. Madam Speaker, to just quickly guide the process for not only the listening public, but for colleagues in the Legislative Assembly. This bill is a bill for a law to amend the Dangerous Substances Handling and Storage Law 2003 and for incidental and connected purposes. Madam Speaker, at our last I'm a bit anxious, Madam Speaker, forgive me. Madam Speaker, forgive me for laughing at myself. I beg to move the second reading of a bill for a law to amend the Dangerous Substances Handling and Storage Law 2003.
The bill has been duly moved. Does the Honourable Minister responsible for the presentation of the bill wish to speak thereto?
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and so I shall. Madam Speaker, at our last meeting, the government gave its commitment to present the amendments to the Dangerous Substances Handling and Storage Law for debate, and at that time we were very hopeful for safe passage through this Legislative Assembly. The purpose of these amendments, Madam Speaker, is to operationalize the Dangerous Substances Handling and Storage Law, which was enacted in 2003, well over a decade ago, to bring the petroleum and fuel sector fully into compliance with internationally recognized codes, with internationally recognized standards and best practices for the well-being of these islands. That is, for safeguarding life and limb, property, and, as importantly, the environment. If you would allow me, Madam Speaker, I wish to simply provide a brief background and history of this law and the sector to which it relates. In 2003, this Legislative Assembly met and enacted the Dangerous Substances Handling and Storage Law, which replaced the Petroleum Handling and Storage Law 1996 revision. Among other things, this law was mainly aimed at strengthening the government's oversight of the sector, primarily to ensure that the industry continued to manage its obligation by utilizing and complying with up-to-date and relevant codes and standards which are continually being established within the sector. So, the law saw the creation of a specialized unit, which we now know as the Petroleum Inspectorate, which, when operating with adequate resources and capabilities and within a set framework, was intended to achieve government's objective outlined above, thereby mitigating against risks which are inherent in this particular industry, and hence against significant liabilities for any future government. Madam Speaker, today we have the Dangerous Substances Law. And yes, we have a functioning Petroleum Inspectorate unit, but regrettably, the mechanisms and systems which are required under the law are not in place, or otherwise not very effective to allow the regime to fulfill its mandate. Nonetheless, within these limitations, we have spared no effort to ensure the public is safeguarded as best as we can through the resolve and commitment to preserve these islands. In actual fact, Madam Speaker, our efforts are also protecting the industry against itself. However, in a few instances, because of what I term the fracture within the system of oversight, we have been legally impotent to bring about the necessary compliance which is required. Testimony of what has been accomplished is evidence in the fact that we have not had any major incidents. But, Madam Speaker, we all know that this can lead to complacency, recognizing that it would be irresponsible of us to continue to operate in the same vein has pushed us to the point where we are now. And that point, Madam Speaker, is to advance amending legislation to regularize, streamline, and fully legitimize government's interaction with the fuel sector. Madam Speaker, with the passage of this amending legislation, the gaps which now exist will be remedied, and thereby setting us on a fresh course in this sector. Madam Speaker, let me say that while delays often represent missed opportunities, it doesn't always call for negative consequences. These critical amendments which are being brought today, although somewhat delayed, have provided my ministry, Madam Speaker, the unique opportunity to include in the amendments an additional significant issue which needs to be confronted within the fuel sector. Madam Speaker, as a government, we have for quite some time been passionate yet very temperate on this issue. We have been forbearing given the moods and attitudes to which we have been exposed. We have, Madam Speaker, and I dare say continue to endure what I would describe as unnecessary and unwarranted frustrations, a situation which has tested our mettle. It certainly has tested our patience, and increasingly it is leaving us with very little option but to move forward, or should I say very little option to move forward in the spirit of true collaboration with key industry partners within the sector. Madam Speaker, I say partners, sorry, because we should be viewing the key players in the sector as potential true partners. But I have to tell the entire country today that this is seemingly without reciprocal sentiments. In other words, doesn't seem to me like they believe and think the same way that we do. From a broader perspective, global and indeed local factors in recent times have escalated the issue. So it certainly is high on this government's agenda. Madam Speaker, since assuming the role of minister in 2013, with oversight for the fuel sector, myself and my colleagues have been doing what I would call a fair amount of homework to make sure that we were fully able to understand exactly how it works and to make sure that any course of action that we took was one that was sustainable and that we could move forward to improve the situation, especially locally. And that issue that I have been talking about for the last couple of minutes, Madam Speaker, is none other than fuel pricing and what I would term as the obstinacy of the key players within the sector to cooperate with successive governments, Madam Speaker, not just this government, but with successive governments over a very long period of time, to chart a course forward which is mutually beneficial to the government and the people and industry colleagues regarding this topic of fuel pricing. By now, Madam Speaker, we have fairly good knowledge and understanding of the economic and commercial operation of the sector. However, this government, while not being intent on being heavy-handed or unilateral in our approach, we're seeking to address this in a manner that will get the desired results. Right as we speak, Madam Speaker, efforts are underway to have an independent assessment of the commercial operation of the main fuel suppliers. And that assessment is examining the supply chain, trading, economies of scale, the asset base, the pricing structure, and the profitability levels within the sector. This, Madam Speaker, along with other parallel efforts, will allow the government, hopefully, but not necessarily, in collaboration with key stakeholders, to come up with objective, open, and equitable solutions. So, Madam Speaker, as we deliberate the bill before us, I am very aware of the attention that key aspects of the proposed legislation has been receiving. However, we have been proactive in ensuring that critical provisions are included to ensure a viable, sustainable, compliant, and transparent fuel sector for all of the residents and visitors to the Cayman Islands. So, Madam Speaker, before I speak to the specifics of that area of the proposed amendments, I want to go through all of the other amendments to get past that section before we go into this other area. The main changes to the existing law that are proposed are as follows. Of course, Madam Speaker, Clause 1 provides the short title and the commencement provisions. And it is anticipated that once the bill is approved, swift action will be taken to have the law and its regulations brought into force. Our timetable indicates that this will be accomplished by the end of the month. Clause 2 amends the short title of the law, and it is proposed that the legislation will deal with matters which are wider than the handling and storage of dangerous substances. So we are proposing that the legislation, once it is approved, will be called simply the Dangerous Substances Law, not limited to handling and storage. So that'll be taken out of the name. The words handling and storage have been deleted to reflect the expanded remit of the law. You see, while this is a minor amendment, Madam Speaker, it is certainly with major desirable consequences for the proposed law, as the current title limits the functioning of the department which is tasked with enforcing the law only to matters of an operational, compliance, and non-commercial nature within the sector. This has been one of the barriers to the cooperation and collaboration that we have been seeking to foster with the industry. So the title has been amended and now covers a much wider spectrum, particularly, Madam Speaker, the ability to require and obtain information relating to pricing. And I'm going to address that a little bit later on in my presentation. Nonetheless, Madam Speaker, oversight of the handling and storage aspect of the sector, I want to make it very clear, will in no way be subordinated. This has and will continue to be a major thrust of the Petroleum Inspectorate, which is tasked with the oversight. So its capacity is going to have to be augmented to adequately fulfill the requirement of the proposed law. Just to clarify, please note that while we are speaking about dangerous substances for the most part in the amendments, at times we will only focus on fuel where the provisions relates only to fuel. So, as we all know, fuel is only one type of dangerous substance. Clause 3, Madam Speaker, amends the principal law to change certain definitions. A few minor changes were made in various sections of the principal law to bring the legislation in line with current titles, positions, and in cases where terms needed to be defined for clarity within the context of the law. The definition of handling, for instance, has been amended given some of the interpretational issues that we have been countering in the past so as to ensure compliance on the part of operators. Some of the other changes, though apparently cosmetic, were required to ensure a comprehensive overhaul of the current legislation. On the weightier changes, I want to elaborate a little bit, Madam Speaker, on the definition change of operator. We have been faced with some issues which, due to, should I say, the lack of the ability of the legislation presently, proved very difficult for us to require relevant parties to take appropriate action necessary to fulfill or to remedy issues at hand. Madam Speaker, a quick example of the inability of this law to deal with certain things is, and just to broad brush that example, I remember in 2007, when there was an independent investigation carried out, there were certain fuel pipelines going through certain locations, and the impacts and possible impacts that were found there were attempts by the inspectorate to remedy that, but because of the way the law was worded, the matter was never really truly resolved. So I'm pleased to inform the House today that the amended definition that is proposed is going to be all-encompassing. Any person who owns, has custody of, is responsible in their capacity of caretaker or director of an entity, is an occupier of a premises, typically private residential homes, and in the cases of vehicles, person who own, lease, or operate the vehicle involved or connected in any way with dangerous substances for trade or for gain. All of the above are now clearly defined as operators under the proposed law. And certainly, because of that change, they will be held accountable going forward once they fit within any of those categories. Madam Speaker, to ensure that the subtle change to permitted vehicle is not overlooked, this definition mandates that all purpose-built or modified vehicles, land or watercraft built to transport fuel as cargo, that is, not in their fuel tank for propulsion or utility purposes, are now subject to the law, or will be once the bill is passed. And more importantly, there is no threshold or minimum quantity below which the law does not apply. All such vehicles will be required to have a permit under the proposed law. Clause 5 seeks to repeal Section 3 of the law which deals with concessions. So, you see, Madam Speaker, since the enactment of the legislation in 2003, no concessions for importation of or dealing with dangerous substances have ever been issued. And so it is proposed that this section will now provide for the regulation of the importation of dangerous substances. So any person who wishes to import a specified amount of such substances must have a valid permit issued by the Chief Petroleum Inspector to do so. And the regulations are being finalized too, Madam Speaker, as I speak, and will provide for details on the licensing regime and appeals arising from the decisions of the Chief Petroleum Inspector, who will be making these decisions, and the appeals will be able to be heard by the board. Madam Speaker, any importer on each importation of a dangerous substance for which an import permit will be required shall provide to the Chief Petroleum Inspector a record of such importation within 7 days of the date of the importation of the dangerous substance. And such record shall provide the name of the importer, the type and the quantity of the dangerous substance. An importer who fails to comply with this requirement commits an offense and will be liable on summary conviction to a fine of $10,000. Madam Speaker, further to this, any importer who imports more than the prescribed amount of dangerous substances without an import permit commits an offense and will be liable on summary conviction to a fine of $50,000 or to an imprisonment for a term of 5 years or both. And if the offense is a continuing one, to a further fine of $10,000 for every day or part of a day during which the offense continues after the conviction. This provision, Madam Speaker, will serve to streamline the process of fuel importation, ensuring that key requirements are met by all players, thereby leveling the playing field for all importers. Clause 6 amends Section 4, Madam Speaker, to provide that an operating permit will no longer be issued for an indefinite period. In fact, these permits will be issued for a maximum of 3 years under the proposed legislation. Persons who are operating regulated vehicles or regulated premises at the date of the commencement of this legislation without an operating permit will be required to apply for such permit within 3 months of the commencement of the regulations made under Section 4 of the principal legislation. Clause 7, Madam Speaker, seeks to amend Section 5 of the law, among other things, to replace the term permanent secretary with chief officer. Clause 8 repeals Section 6 to provide that the functions of the board shall include hearing appeals in accordance with the new proposed Section 3. And Madam Speaker, now turning our attention to Clause 9. This new section in the law will provide for the establishment of a fuel standards committee, which will be responsible, among other things, for setting and publishing the standards of fuel to be imported into and sold in the islands. The committee shall consist of the Chief Petroleum Inspector, who shall be chairman, the Director of the Department of Environmental Health or his nominee, the Director of Environment or his nominee, the Director of the Water Authority or his nominee. And I say his, Madam Speaker, knowing full well that both of these directors are now female, but in law, he means he or she. In the past, Madam Speaker, occasional issues surfaced in relation to fuel quality concerns across the 3 islands. But in recent times, the issue became widespread, and it prompted an investigation in 2013, the culmination of which pointed to the need for requisite legislation in this area. And so, to ensure that robust fuel standards are established, the committee may appoint or empanel subcommittees, whether from among members of that committee or from among persons outside of the committee, or both, to study and make recommendations to the committee on any aspect of the regulation of fuel standards referred by the committee. So, you see, Madam Speaker, we recognize that the makeup of that committee does not necessarily bring into the committee all of the expertise that may be required from time to time. Hence, the committee's ability to reach out to whatever level of expertise in whatever specific area. And it is impossible to just have a committee which is made up of such a small group that we are comfortable will have no need to reach outside of that realm to make sure that decisions that are made with a certain level of being fully informed and competent, I should say, decision. So hence, that part of the oversight being allowed to function in that manner. Madam Speaker, this kind of oversight really requires a high degree of specialization. So members of any subcommittee who are not members of the committee are required to have the relevant scientific or technical knowledge in the area of fuel quality standards or qualifications if and when necessary, in chemistry, biology, or environmental studies, or both, in fact. So, as the need requires, such subcommittees will be formed and used and compensated as Cabinet may determine. Madam Speaker, this committee will carry out such duties that are specified in the law and in the regulations. And just to name some of the duties, these duties may well include establishing the standards of certain types of fuels to be imported and distributed in the islands, publishing or causing to be published in such medium as they may determine such standards and the testing methods to be used by importers and the Chief Petroleum Inspector in the inspection of fuel in order to ensure compliance with the standards, and also they will be required to provide periodic reports to the Minister on the operations of the committee. So, as anticipated, Madam Speaker, enforcement is therefore a very critical component of oversight, and the legislation provides that where, after inspections are carried out in accordance with the legislation, it is found by the Chief Petroleum Inspector or by an inspector under the CPI that an importer has been importing and distributing to operators or direct consumers fuel which does not accord with standards published under Section 9B, the Chief Petroleum Inspector shall require the importer to comply forthwith with any written direction not inconsistent with this law, which the Chief Petroleum Inspector believes on reasonable grounds is necessary to ensure that the importation or distribution of such fuel is immediately discontinued. And an importer who fails to comply with such direction commits an offense and will be liable to an administrative penalty, and the relevant import permit of such person may be suspended or revoked in accordance with the procedure set out in the legislation. So, to ensure strict compliance, the enforcement regime cannot be very tolerant to nonconformity or inconsistencies in set parameters, because consequences can be dire if and when substandard fuel penetrates the market. Madam Speaker, consequences can be dire, meaning for the consumers. We've had instances in the past where there have been lots of mechanical failures because of substandard fuel or alleged. So as such, an importer who, Madam Speaker, more than once in any period of 1 year imports and distributes fuel which is found by the CPI to be, or rather not to be, in accordance with the standards set out by the committee, commits an offense, and that entity or person too will be liable to an administrative penalty, and the relevant import permit of such person may be suspended or cancelled in accordance with the procedure prescribed by the legislation. Now, Madam Speaker, Clause 10 is a transformational provision which is guaranteed to liberate government from the informational abyss when it comes to local fuel prices. But, Madam Speaker, I crave your indulgence to allow me to expand on that a little bit later on in the presentation while I just finish up the other smaller amendments. Clause 11, I just mentioned 10 because I'm trying to go through it in sequence first of all. Clause 11, Madam Speaker, amends Section 12 to clarify that a fine and imprisonment can be alternative penalties. Under the current legislation, there are a number of instances where fines and penalties were imposed in conjunction. This has been amended, or is proposed to be amended, mainly to allow the fines and penalties to be rational and to be proportionate. These amendments, Madam Speaker, are very similar in nature to the changes proposed under clauses 15 and 16. Clause 12 amends Section 13 of the current legislation to strengthen the reporting requirements by operators for fuel spills or release to the environment. The current provision is not specific in terms of reportable quantities, which makes such reporting very subjective as it stands. This is highly undesirable, and the regulations will further outline details related to this provision.
At this time, the House will suspend for 10 minutes.